fascinating thing about gardening is that one never knows it all, ever. There's always more to learn. And so as part of my gardening, I always love doing experiments. And there are many different kinds of experiments you can do. One that I'm going to show you now actually encompasses two things at once, and it's to do with which date is the best time for sowing according to the moon. And another one is which compost is good for sowing into when using trays and containers. So here I have two trays side by side. One is filled with multi-purpose compost, organic multi-purpose compost from West Riding, and this one is filled with sieved cow manure. So it's pure manure, but it's well rotted, it's 2 years old, so it's not really manure anymore, it's compost. So I'm sowing pea seeds into both of these trays, and the other part of this experiment is that the further end of each tray, I've already sowed some pea seeds 2 weeks ago, in fact, when the moon was just before full moon. So it was 2 days before full moon, and experiments in Germany in the 1920s suggested, over 10 years, suggested that sowing 2 days before full moon gave more vigorous plants. So now we're actually 10 days after full moon, so we're at the other end of the spectrum. We're into waning moon, full-on waning moon. Now it won't be an exact match for match, this experiment, because the seeds are sown so much later, but there will be an indication. It's like none of these experiments actually prove anything, and I'm not claiming that for 1 minute. The idea is that you'll get an idea, sometimes you see things, the unexpected things are often the most interesting ones. When a true experiment, you don't have a preconceived idea about what's going to happen, but you just set things up so that differences can reveal themselves, and sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. If there's no differences, if the experiment yields the same thing in both cases, then, well, you've learned that there's no need to worry about doing it either way. So you always learn something, even if it's nothing. Here I'm kneeling in an experiment comparing the effect of digging soil, the first bed here, without any compost added, and then the second bed undug and also without any compost added. The undug soil with moss on top, and also, in fact, this is a green manure residue of old mustard stems that I sowed last September. So basically this one's been undisturbed and it's going to grow the same crop side by side. And finally, in this experiment, there's a third bed which is undug also, but with some compost added to the surface, a couple of inches last winter and a couple of inches this winter just gone. So it's had a good covering 2 years in a row, and again this has the same vegetables grown. So it's a 3-bed experiment growing the same crops. And there's one further element to this experiment, which is that I've added some rock dust in a strip down one side of each bed, just to see whether that shows any difference in the rows across the bed. And rock dust is made from volcanic basalt rock, which is high in trace elements and minerals. So the idea is that if any are missing in the soil, it replenishes them, and you have more healthy, balanced and fertile growth. So here I'm kneeling between another dig-no-dig experiment. This time I have added some compost. Initially, over a year ago, I filled 8 inches of compost into both of these beds, and the one on your left has been dug as well. So the pasture was killed by the soil being turned upside down on top of the compost, whereas in the bed on your right, the same amount of compost was simply put on top of the pasture, and that killed all the weeds. Then I grow the same vegetables in each bed and compare their growth. Just 2 or 3 months ago, I dug this bed again, incorporated 3 inches of compost into it, and this one I simply put that same 3 inches amount of compost on top of the undisturbed soil. So this took about 5 hours, this took about 1 hour. Much more work is involved in the digging. Growing the same vegetables in each bed, how does it compare? Well, last year it was very similar actually. 81 kilos here in the dug bed, 83 kilos here in the undug bed, almost the same. And you can get an idea already here. Garlic growing in the dug soil, very similar looking to garlic growing in the undug soil, both of them planted last October. And then in fact, these beds are now all planted already. I've got fleece on the new plantings to keep the cold winds off. But for example, you can see the first planting here is some onions from module sowing. They only went in 10 days ago, so they're still very tiny. But you can see more than that, the difference. That's soil, dug soil on top there. And here is some of my homemade compost on top. Same plants, again, multi-sown module onions. And it goes on up with carrots, lettuce, cabbage, beetroot, spinach and potatoes and so on. And as the season goes on, we'll see how they all grow, and I'll be recording the harvest and we'll be keeping you updated, and you can also see on my website frequent updates of harvest which I've been making. For further information, do visit my website, which is www.charlesdowding.co.uk, and also I've written a wide range of books that are widely available.